Paul, welcome back to the show. I don't know about you, but I feel like a new man. My next guest created NBC's Saturday Night Live and was the producer of that program from 1975 to 1980. Please welcome Mr. Lorne Michaels, ladies and gentlemen. Lorne, how are you? Nice to see you, sir. How are you holding up with the weather here in New York City? Does it bother?
Doesn't, oh, God, right to the weather. It doesn't, I'm from Canada originally, and so I'm used to snow, and when it snows, it's not that cold, and so I like it, well.
So this didn't bother you at all?
No. Do you think I was articulate enough about the weather?
I think, yeah. Now, what you mentioned that I led with the weather, maybe.
Right.
As a producer, I probably should have maybe faked with another question and then gone to the weather.
Well, the weather, I think the weather was a good opening gambit, going with the weather. And I think that's the way most people begin conversations, that it takes us off the hole and sex. And I think that, God, I had so many things to say about the weather as I was walking here in the weather. Yeah. And then
You walked from here? You lived relatively close then? What a conclusion.
Yes, indeed. Relatively close, yeah. Well, I live uptown.
In the neighborhood.
Yeah, and then I walked, yes, but I have an office near here.
You know, in all of the reams of data, material, and so forth I was perusing about you this afternoon, the word that keeps coming up is pioneer.
Pioneer.
Lorne Michaels, pioneering television. Does that ring true to you?
Not really, no. Pioneer. Well, I appreciate it. I mean, it's makes me sound much older than I am, I think. Pioneer. It sounds sort of like, well, no, I don't want to mention names. No, I think live television, I suppose, is what they mean, and coming back to that form, which was, in fact, a pioneer form, but only because videotape hadn't been invented. I think if videotape had been invented, I think they probably would have gone right to videotape and forgot live. Yeah. But I don't think that makes a great deal of sense. So, pioneer, I
well, that's
think
all right. I have another question.
Sure, go ahead.
I have another question.
Yeah.
Now, you performed yourself.
Yes, I did.
And what was the nature of that act?
It was, sad to say, a comedy act. As you can see, there's almost no trace of that left in me. I began writing with another guy in Canada, and we would write and perform ourselves. I was not great at the performing, although I was very good at... Actually, my part was mostly asking questions, but I sort of knew what the answers would be, and then I'd say stuff like, really? And really. And I was a pacer. I would sort of, he was very funny, and I would sort of take the pause moment in between and sort of support him during that. And then I began to get more and more interested in producing and comfortable there.
I was looking at your biography this afternoon, and it labeled you on Saturday Night Live as, of course, the producer and also part-time performer. And I remember one thing that you did on the show had to do with offering to bring a very famous musical group back together.
Right. I thank you for not mentioning the Beatles in the question. I think no. What happened was I think that I think it was Bill Sargent, who's the producer, had offered the Beatles. I think, God, could it be $50 million? I think it was something like $50 million to reunite. And we had, because we only paid scale, and so the total we had was about $3,500. So I thought it was sort of worth the shot, and I did it, and it was sort of published later that they had that Paul McCartney was in town with at John Lennon's watching it, and actually had considered coming, and then sort of on a whim, and then decided not to. I don't think they actually would have been able to clear security here, and that was sort of my fear at the time. When I first heard about it, I thought,
well, had they shown up, the show was live, of course, went on the air in the East at 11:30.
I think we would have made room for them, yeah.
Tell me about also you, as a writer, you wrote for Woody Allen.
Oh, almost nothing that I think he ever used. I think when you're starting, he was actually very, very kind to my partner and myself at the time. I was just sort of thrilled to be in a room with him at the time. He was still doing stand-up mostly, and we would write tons of stuff, and he would sort of select one thing, and he used to throw out enormous amounts of our stuff and I think of his stuff. But I was just sort of very impressed at the time with the quality of his garbage.
Yeah.
Because most comedians were sort of making their act from what he was sort of throwing away. And I thought that that's what, being in a room with him, someone who was very intelligent and...
Did you make any contribution at all, or was there anything that he really liked that you wrote?
God, this is 1967. I think there was, I remember doing something about that being obsessed about the thought that there was somebody who was thinking the same thought as I was at the same time somewhere in the world, and and then sort of a long expository part about finding this person, and then sort of every time you called, the line was busy.
Yeah.
Which was a bright joke then. It was the kind of joke that people were doing at the time, and he said, I think that's funny. That's very funny. And I remember it kept me going for about 2-3 years that he said that at the time. He was incredibly encouraging, and I was later to find that not everybody sort of had these very high standards and sort of generosity of heart that he had. And but by that time, I was pretty much committed to this life, and as you see, it's led me here.
What is, was there, during the course of the time you were producing the show, was there something that you wanted on desperately and for one reason or another could not get it on, whether they wouldn't approve it or it didn't come together in the performing or writing or so forth?
Well, there were sort of two categories of things. There was things that we thought were incredibly funny up to the point of the audience at dress rehearsal. The nice part about the show, and I think what kept it honest, was that as confident as we would be, and particularly at the beginning of the show, we were way overpraised. And so we got to believe that we really actually knew what we were doing. And so we'd do something and everybody be very smug, you know, and then dress rehearsal, 300 civilians would come in and say, it doesn't work. I don't know why you thought it worked. And so we would scramble in between dress and air. You would get it, somehow get it on, but by that point it was so demoralized that it you were thrilled that it worked. And I think that the expression on the cast's face quite often of being thrilled that it worked, I think was sort of infectious. In terms of things that were cut for censorship reasons.
Speaking of cutting and censoring, we got to do a commercial,
okay,
and we'll continue this with Lorne Michaels right after this, folks. Schaefer, ladies and gentlemen. This is Lorne Michaels, and you answered the first half of that question, or half of it anyway.
Right.
Now the other half.
When I was thinking about it during the break, I was wondering whether I could even sort of talk about it now, because they objected to it then. I think that there was a piece where a senator, the New York State Assembly was discussing capital punishment. And a senator from upstate New York made the point that if the Romans hadn't believed in capital punishment, then Jesus would not have been crucified, and therefore there would be no Christianity today. Which seems somewhat specious at the time. So we actually, Jim Downey, who claims to work here, used to do a frame called What If, and we did What If the Romans had not believed in capital punishment, and Jesus had gotten 8 to 10 and been out on parole. And so we had the apostles coming to Jesus to try and get him back. We were parodying the movie Straight Time. And we were trying to get him to sort of perform one more miracle, and then that was it. He would no longer be involved in, in any of the holy work. And it touched a nerve, and we got it all the way to dress rehearsal. Actually, it was.
Which nerve where was touched?
The nerve at NBC at the time. I think things have completely, as you saw from earlier in the evening, things have completely changed here. But at the time, I think that there was something about that we were, in fact, calling into question the divinity of Christ, which I think the point was that we weren't, but it was, the funny part about the story is not that part. The funny part, I suppose, is sort of arguing about this on a grand sort of philosophical level, very close to airtime, when we've already done it at dress rehearsal and people have laughed, and I have like a 20-minute hole in the show if we don't get the piece on. and seeing sort of Danny and John dressed as sort of shepherds and having all of these. We used to have a lot of animals on the show, and you'd sort of, they'd come in from like very far away and stuff like that. And so on a theatrical level, you don't want to cut the piece because it works and because everybody's sort of there. Michael Sarrazin, I think, was playing Jesus at the time, and that was the other problem. He didn't. That was sort of the main sketch, and so he would have very little to do. If it was those kind of problems.
So I guess it never got in.
No, this is as close as it got.
Let me ask you a couple of questions of that specifically.
Sure.
When do you know when to quit fighting? I mean, how do you know when to say, okay, fine, let's go on to something else?
I think on that one we were at midnight when we stopped fighting. The thing about live is that...
But I mean, philosophically, from you, how do you know when to give it up, that this may not be a battle to the death?
When it's not your night, you mean?
Yeah.
I don't think... I think as I got older, I learned to give up a little sooner, but then as I got older, I started to win more often. Yeah. So it was easier to give up. I think that... Our fights were never, I think that as long as the tone of the argument was high, and we never had like a strong desire to put sort of profanity on the air or whatever, because you can turn to cable for that, there's no problem. It was just, what we were trying to do was do something which was intelligent, and I think that when you do things that are intelligent, the assumption is that no one will be offended, because very few people will understand. When you do something that is that could be misinterpreted, that is intelligent, people tend to take it on the other level. There were lots of things like that.
Okay, the other question: what now do you do, having eliminated an 8-9 minute sketch from the show at midnight that's on the air then?
I think what we would always we had generally some film that we could play, but basically the show was always about a half hour long. I would always claim it was about 12 minutes long, and Audrey, who was the associate producer, would claim that it was 35 minutes long. And so there was always more to it. But the worst thing, the nice part about letting it run long is, and I think that the show's antecedents are not so much from Show of Shows as they were in that regard from the Sullivan Show, because I think Sullivan, in a completely arbitrary way, used to do the show once through, long, and then make cuts just between dress and air. And so comedians who did a 7-minute piece would be cut down to 3 minutes or whatever, and we would do. So there was always a question of tightening. So it was never, in that particular show, that was the centerpiece. There was always one piece which you thought you couldn't possibly fill 90. As you know, you can't possibly fill 90 minutes a week and make it. Brilliant from beginning to end.
We bring a guy out with a drill when we have a little time.
Well, but you see, I think those things are actually. We used to do a thing with a blender where Dan. Oh, let you get away.
Excuse me. We're coming back. Lorne Michaels. Thank you, folks. We're nearly out of time. I want to thank Dr. Ruth Westheimer. Also, thank you very much, Lorne Michaels, for being here. Bill Maher will be rescheduled. I'm sorry we didn't get to him tonight. Tomorrow night, Monique Van Voren and her 200 pairs of shoes. Don't miss it. Good night.